Greetings. Welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Grace Pinadu. On this episode, we're going to continue from the last episode that was entitled Broken. Now, this title is revealing. It is repairing, ellipsis, repaired. Now, the ellipses are purposeful. That is, it tells a story, which is that repairing is about the process, and that I, like much of us, at least those of us who are interested in reconciling, healing, whatever you want to call it, coming to terms, if you will, with the pain that makes us who we are. And the repaired is the outcome, but the outcome is not guaranteed, nor is it essentially a logical next step. In other words, repaired doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen while we're still in human form. And I get into that in this video. So let's jump right into it and pick up where we left off. Quick recap for those of you who did not join us for the previous video entitled Broken. And if you have not, please go check it out. And then this one will make even more sense to you, though you can pick up here if you desire. So in the video Broken, the main argument and the point of view laid out to you was that pain is the regulator and even generator of who and what we are in this human form. It makes us in many ways. And there's no one that can escape the force field or the gravitational pull of pain. Let me give you some stats to bring this a little bit closer to you. Over 70% of the globe, that is 7 billion plus people on this planet that we call Earth, 70% of people on this globe, by current estimates, experience or live life with some form of chronic pain. I'll let that sit with you. 2/3 or more, actually more closely, 3/4 of the world's population, this world's population, lives with or experiences chronic pain. Let's add to that. About 1/3 of all adults experience or have self-reported to experience forms of anger, uncontrollable anger, rage that leads to, in many cases, either violence against the self or violence against others or both. 2/3, that is about 65-66% of young adults, that's between 14 and 21, also experience or have reported the same forms of anger, uncontrollable anger that usually leads to some form of violent outcome. Now, what does anger, pain, trauma have to do with anything about, who we are and what we do in this human lifetime? Well, actually everything. Let me explain. Now continue the story. So in the story, I gave you all a sort of a snapshot of a traumatic event that happened to me. And according to world estimates, 20% of the globe have experienced at least one or will experience at least one traumatic event in their lifetime. That's about over 1.5 billion people. So I was one of them. And I'm not the only one. I experienced a traumatic event when I was about 10 years old, a fire. And that fire, and after that fire, I lost the 4 people that I was closest to me. And I essentially ditched love, and that made me into a very angry, bitter, and essentially someone who rejected not only the idea of love, but even the practice of love. I just could not give it, except, and this is an important caveat, except my own blood, meaning that my children or my mom or my brother or my sister. And so if you are not close blood, I don't mean like aunties and uncles and third cousins, I mean immediate blood, right? Grandfather, mother, brother, children. And so I poured in those years all the love that I could muster for what was left of me, given that the other part of me had gone home. The woolly innocent goodness child had gone home, the remnants of me, poured all that it had into my two daughters. And so I, almost every day I played with them, homework, created all kinds of games, read them stories, invented stories, almost every night, every other night. Took them on trips. Those girls have been to countries that I have not gone to, certainly as a child, young adult, until much later in life. I've gone to these places, so they've been around the world in many respects. They've been to Europe, to Africa, the Caribbean, other parts of the world. They have been to, and take them to school, pick them up, go to all their school events. So I was more than just the involved father. I poured, all that I had of me in this body, with the specter, of course, of that spirit of Kwesi hovering over, but still, again, he could not control everything that I did. But certainly he had an intervention, in some of the things I did. And by the way, let me explain something to you all that is very important. Not a tangent, but it's a very important point, since I'm here in this part of the story. Many of us believe that, spiritual forces of beings, they speak to us as if I'm speaking to you. And while that is partially true, yes, because they happen to many people who are spiritualists or spiritually inclined, spirits do speak as if I'm speaking to you. But here's the thing that we often don't know or fail to appreciate, if we do know, is that spirits, when they say spirits speak to us, particularly those that will temporarily or for a period of time, inhabit, our physical bodies, right? Our flesh. They do so. In fact, they don't have to inhabit. Let me correct that. But they can. But they don't have to inhabit. They speak to us as our own thoughts. And so their voice become indistinguishable from our thoughts. And so, for example, I remember many times in a previous relationship, there'll be an argument or a discussion that became heated. Not a violent one, at least merely words, but still an argument. And, walking away, and I'm thinking to myself, hint, hint, I'm thinking to myself, well, I should just go back and just apologize, or just go back and mend things and make things right. And then I would say to myself, but I didn't start the argument. I didn't start the fight. In fact, I was really blindsided, by it. I didn't even know that I was in part of an argument until it became clear to me in the midst of it. So why should I go back? And so this particular, back and forth that's happening within me is not a sign of insanity or craziness. In fact, it's quite healthy. We all go through it. And if you don't, you're lying. Is that we all go through this tug of war in terms of, should I do this, should I not do this? How about that? How about this? We go through that. That's why we have a mind, which is a spirit, by the way. And that spirit and that mind can always be influenced by other spirits that come into our mind. It's really as simple as that. And so spirits don't necessarily have to talk to you like I'm talking to you to be effective. In fact, they are most effective when essentially their voice becomes indistinguishable, that is the same as our own thoughts. And so you will think, hey, that's a good idea. Or you will think, hey, why don't I do that, right? And that may be essentially your own undoing. And so it's a very important point. So I wrestled with the spirit of Kwesi, when those thoughts were coming to me, and I would say, Or sometimes it would feel like my own, and I would just follow through with it. And afterwards, I was like, that was wrong, right? That's when you know that you're being driven by a force other than wholly or truly you. Nonetheless, let's jump back into our story. So, given that the fire had this was my traumatic event, right? It was my essentially flashpoint. It was my major, my sort of big bang moment. That really set me on a course, But along that course, I kept on fighting, between my real true self. Again, as some of you may know in my previous videos, and certainly in my bio, my mother, my dear mom, nicknamed me Rayon, which is a silk-like fabric, as many of you know. And she said the story is, as she told me when I was younger, that I was like as a baby, I was like silk. I felt like silk. And so she nicknamed me Rayon. And so she calls me that, or she'll call me Ray for short. And so, I was and remained that person, but, it was a fight and struggle because the more, that anger and bitterness grew in me, and that sort of rejection, of love from a woman, again, not my children, because they poured into me, I poured into them. And I very much love all of them. And so that didn't change, but my relationship with women, was affected by, this rejection. And so, as the saying goes, you are what you attract. And essentially, I attracted, what I was, which was, a person that put the intelligence aside, put the, scholarship aside, the professor, all that other stuff aside. I was this person that, was, fighting literally and metaphorically, my own demon, as it were, this negative spirit that has found fertile ground in me. And so in this video, what I want to do is share with you strategies and how to essentially begin to repair. Because if you're watching this video, if you've heard about, this video, and was shared this video with you through someone, you have experienced at least one traumatic event in your lifetime. And you would have certainly experienced, some form of chronic pain, some form of uncontrollable anger and bitterness. And here's the secret sauce I'm going to share with you all. This is very important, so pay attention. You see, we, right, as spirits, meaning non-physical beings, are sent to this earth through portals. And these portals, they look less like a door or a window. They look like the female reproductive system. And that particular organ, that shape of that organ, it looks exactly like the portals. And through that portal, which makes sense, we come into this earth through some woman's, private part or portal. And when we come to this earth, we take on, obviously, a physical human body, and we become more densified, right? Now, as such, you may ask, and you should ask, well, why be born in the first place? Which is a good question to ask. It's actually a great question. Here's why. You see, our presence on this earth, or any particular, planet of sorts, but particularly here on earth, which is what we know and know best, at least we think we do. We are put here to be tested. But not just any test, not like a test that you bubble in, or a quiz, not those kind of tests, no. We are put here, much like the Netflix series Squid Game, with all the implied violence involved. We're put here, to be tested. And each round, right, each episode, each moment, right, is a test. And a test is going to be, it will come at unexpected times. Even when you think you know the time it will come, it won't come that time. It will come unexpected time. But that's what tests are. Real test is anyway. And so these tests are designed to do this. And here's the secret sauce, folks. Listen carefully. We're put here to be tested against the venom on the vices of hate, anger, and bitterness, and see how we fare. Simple, isn't it? Very simple. But I'm sure many of you, if you're honest with yourself, did not know that. Yes, we're put here for that purpose, and that purpose largely, which is why the better part of us checks out and goes back home, because we can't go back home filled with hate, bitterness, and anger. We won't make it. We can't cross that threshold. We can't go back through the portal. And I don't mean the woman's vagina. We can't go back to the portal or the portals that are designed to take us home. We can't go back. And given that we can't go back as such, this is precisely why we are tested. This is also why we, as human beings, can never, ever live in peace. Because we are saturated by mostly, vast majority, of human beings, right? Some just negative spirits, some positive ones who take on human form, but human beings nonetheless, who are wrestling with, if they haven't resigned to it or yielded or given up, with the challenges, with the obstacle course of anger, bitterness, and hate. That's our challenge, our serial challenge. By serial, I mean in a series. That's our challenge. And therefore, what is the answer? Simple. LOVE. But not that simple. Because you can't go looking for love. It has to find you. And you say, well, how does it find me? Well, you got to fight hate, bitterness, anger. Because those are the real roadblocks and hindrances to love finding you.